Welcome to LWDG POD DOG, the podcast that helps women train their gun dogs and become part of a supportive community. I'm Joanne Perrott, founder of the Ladies Working Dog Group, and I'm thrilled to be your host. Our online membership offers expert training, monthly courses, and live coaching sessions that empower women to become confident and skilled gun dog handlers. Join us as we share insights, advice, and stories to help you and your four-legged friend achieve your goals. So, grab your headphones, sit back, and let's get started. Hello and welcome to another episode of LWDG POD DOG. This week's podcast is all about adolescence and hormones in Gundog training. So welcome to everybody listening. I'd like to welcome our LWDG experts, Claire Denyer and Gemma Martin. How are you this week, Claire?
I'm very well, Jo. Thank you. How are you?
I'm fabulous. And how are you, Gem?
Yeah, all good.
Back to our topic for this podcast. Let's start with a little bit around understanding what adolescence is. I know a lot of us might be thinking, well, that's an obvious one, but what is adolescence in dogs?
So adolescence is a part of a dog's young sort of developmental stage. So it's the dog going from puppyhood into adulthood. It's that in-between stage. There's a lot going on for the dog during adolescence, which kicks off for most dogs from around 5 months of age, which seems very, very young. But I think when you put that into context about the lifespan of a dog, compared to the lifespan of your average human, then it's no wonder that adolescence starts with a dog younger. But yes, so from 5 months of age, your dog is going through a lot of hormonal changes, developmental changes. The dog is still growing physically and mentally. So there's a lot happening, and breed dependent and size dependent of the dog will alter when that period of time is over for that dog. Some dogs seem to be in adolescence for longer than others, and typically with things like growing, the larger the breed, the longer that takes. So your smaller breeds tend to physically mature earlier than your larger breeds, and with that does come some maturity as well. Gemma, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think you've covered that really well, other than it can be a really, really difficult time for owners to deal with because they think that they've nailed certain things in training, and then everything starts to sort of slowly unravel and they don't understand why.
We've chatted a little bit about adolescence. Let's talk a little bit about how it would affect any dog's behaviour, but how that's sort of emphasised with a gun dog, or why we see it have more of a problem with a gun dog.
So one of the things that I see with a lot of people with young gun dogs, especially people that are really into their gun dog training and they want to get out and do maybe puppy working tests. I'm gonna sort of just touch on that briefly. So obviously there's an age limit to puppy working tests. So the owner will be trying to get their dog to a standard and a level as quickly as possible after 6 months of age to get the dog into a puppy working test. And that's all very well and good, and it's great to have those goals and want to achieve that. But we also do have to bear in mind that during that time that the dog is going to be entered into those tests, they are going through adolescence. So we always say that adolescence in dog training and gun dog training is like a roller coaster through adolescence. So you'll feel like you have a few weeks that are going really, really well, everything's coming together, and then they seem to have a blip, or the dog seems more distracted than usual. And so if people are wanting to get out and compete with a very young dog because of wanting to do, let's say, working tests, there's going to be quite a bit of pressure on that dog to be able to perform to a certain standard, to do well in working tests. And I think we have to sometimes take a step back and say, why is this going wrong? Why is the dog not ready? And it's, as I say, it's great to have those goals, but also we shouldn't be surprised when things maybe don't go as expected.
Yeah, I think Exactly that, and our expectations of gun dogs are sometimes much higher than they would be if they were like a family pet or something like that. We want all their training to almost be sort of robotic by the time they're one. There's almost like this golden age of one that they should be fully trained at and ready to then go on and do some work or tests or trials and things. And we've discussed it before in, I think there was a podcast called The Age Race or something that we did, wasn't there? That I think we often put far too much pressure on our dogs, and that we really need to take things at their own pace, and every dog is going to be different. And I think we say this day in, day out on our podcasts, our masterclass is, and everything that we talk about. And it's very much that dog's and the handler's own training journey. So like you said there, Claire, if a dog isn't ready, a dog isn't ready. And actually putting that much pressure on them can actually set them back in the long run and make your end target move further away.
And putting that much pressure on them as well can cause frustration for the handler and the owner, which then can have a negative impact on the dog's performance as well, and it becomes quite a vicious cycle. And I'm always saying to owners all the time, with young dogs, we want to be very careful that we don't squash a young dog's desire to retrieve or to hunt nicely for us by taking all the fun out of it too quickly. And I think that's one of the challenges with adolescence. It's knowing when the dog is being cheeky or maybe affected by its hormones, and we're going to talk about some of those things that can happen a bit later on, aren't we? But when it's that, or when the dog is just being a bit cheeky, or when they're just a bit distracted. So it's the owner having the ability to read what's happening with the dog and have a little bit of an understanding, but without letting them take the mickey as well. And I think this is that fine line and balance, is knowing how to educate the dog and to progress with the dog, but without being the fun police, taking all the fun out of it, but equally without putting too much pressure on the dog that the dog lose drive as well, because drive is a really important part for people, especially in gun dog training.
I think what you're talking about there is massively important for owners to understand. And there's almost like this sort of clash, isn't there? We have goals that we want to achieve with our dogs, but when a dog starts adolescence, their body almost has goals, like maturing itself and getting ready for the future. And we sort of like are a loggerheads a little bit, because the dog maturing is far more important than what we want to do.
And the dog maturing in a way of, I want to develop a dog that's quite robust and strong in personality. So, and I think for me, that's always been very important, because Indy, after she was attacked, becoming very sensitive to things and having to overcome a lot. Since that, with her, every dog that I bring through myself, and I want this for my clients' dogs as well, is that they're bringing on dogs that are really robust and strong inside, that enjoy the work and are not afraid to give things a go. And I think part of that is building the dog up, and I think getting frustrated with the dog's behaviors through adolescence doesn't really help that and doesn't really support that, and can knock the dog's confidence, because they're like, I just seem to not be able to get this right. And especially I think if you look at young male dogs, and there are absolutely hormonal things going on for males and females, but the way that I describe it to clients with a male dog is it's almost like it's got an inner voice chatting away in the back of its head. It wants to do the retrieve, it wants to please you, but there's this little nagging head in the background going, oh, but wait, was there a female around here? Oh, is another boy been here? Can I like just put my mark in that area? So it's like an inner voice that they're up against. So it's quite a challenge.
Yeah, and I think it's a real frustration for owners, isn't it? Especially if the dogs are really, really on it one day, and then the next day they're off like having a sniff and ignoring a recall or ignoring a dummy just to go off and have a wee. But I think we forget that so much is going on inside their bodies and their brains. Like you say, they've got their little inner monologue that happily plays along. We forget that they're still not physically mature yet either. So a lot of their energy is going into growing and developing muscles and bones and growth plates and all that stuff. And that's tiring. I mean, I think we forget when we were growing up as kids that actually we used to sleep quite a lot, or I did. Maybe that was just me. Maybe I was lazy. But I don't think our dogs, as they get older, I mean, we're very conscious as puppies that they get that downtime, aren't we? But then as they get older, I don't think we're so conscious of the dogs getting enough rest and downtime. So, sorry. So even now, my dogs will still have a couple of days off training a week that they just are allowed to be dogs and chill out, and we'll go for some walks, because it's so easy, like you were saying, Claire, to just start squashing that drive a little bit, especially with dogs that maybe aren't natural, really drivey retrievers. If you just pile it home and get a bit grumpy with them about something, some dogs out of those 10 dogs will just go, oh, do you know what, I don't really want to do it, you do it. And you start losing that lovely drive to go out and get that dummy, and then again the frustration builds up in the handler, and you end up with a handler that's grumpy and a dog that just doesn't want to do the job and would rather go off sniffing because it's more fun.
It's something that we see really, really commonly. And one of the things, well, there were a few things that came to mind when I was thinking about this conversation, was people forget about the teething phase, which is still happening during adolescence. Until the dog is 7 months of age, they're still teething, that, you know, they've still got things going on in the mouth, and sometimes that can cause retrieving issues. The dog becomes more mouthy or even doesn't want to pick things up because of the teething. And then you've got, obviously, for a female, from 6 months of age, they could have their first season at any point from there. So there's all the hormone changes that are going on through there. And some females are really, really affected by their seasons, aren't they? More than others. Some seem to kind of drift in and out of seasons with not too much fuss, and others are really affected. But I think the teething and the fact they're still growing, and I've seen quite a few larger breed dogs where they've had intermittent lameness as well during adolescence because of growing pains and things like that. So I think there's just so many things we need to consider, and not always just think, oh, is the dog just being naughty today? You know, is there a genuine reason? And that's not making excuses for the dogs, but it's being understanding and having the ability to perhaps look more with an outside pair of eyes inward, instead of just judging your dog in that moment, but what is going on with that dog at the moment. So I think that's always worth considering, those little bits and pieces that could be happening, especially if something suddenly happens out of the blue, especially for me with young dogs that are under 7 months. If they suddenly start displaying a behaviour on a retrieve that maybe wasn't there, I might be thinking, oh, and checking the mouth and just seeing, like, is anything going on in there with the teething? And what about you, Jem? Do you see sort of things like that with the younger dogs that you work with?
Yeah, we see all of that type of stuff. And the other thing I've sort of found more recently is, I think it's probably more so with male dogs, but if they've got a handler that's very sort of verbal with them when they're young, and they get shouted at a lot and they get grumbled at a lot, I find the male dogs almost become a bit thick-headed to it. They're like, yeah, whatever, I don't care. So your verbal correction that you might have done as a pup, which worked really well, by the time they're a year old, they're so done with it that they're like, yeah, and and I think that's really hard to get through to some owners, that actually you just need to take it easy. You don't need to rant and rave at them. You just need to show them this is the right way, this is the wrong way, and actually be a bit lenient in some respects with their training, because some of it is going to be down to them having all these hormonal changes, having all these development stages. And I think for some owners, it's really hard to distinguish between what's naughty behaviour and what's them just trying to sort of suss out the world again in their new sort of hormonal growing state. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think, though, if we look at like recognizing the changes, if you think of a human child, you know, it's very easy to see probably what stage of the development they are at roughly by how they look. So, okay, we get frustrated with teenagers and there's loads of like stereotypes of teenagers, but we are very aware that they are in that teenage phase, and we do make allowances for behavior. Like, for example, if my son's grumbling first thing in the morning at like 8 o'clock, I don't think, oh, now is my time to correct him. I just think, just leave him to it now, let him come round a bit, because I'm allowing for the fact that he is a teenager. But I think when you look at a pup, it's suddenly 1 minute it's like really puppy looking and it's really cute and small, and we're very, very over the top loving and kind to it, and then we sort of flip. They hit 6 months old, they're hitting adolescence, and we suddenly go, oh, you're a dog now. And they're not, are they? They're teenagers.
Yeah, absolutely that. And I think this is where actually a trainer can help you, because when you're the handler in the situation, it can be very easy to get frustrated or to think, oh, the dog did this fine yesterday, why is it not doing it today? But looking at things like, so for instance, if a client comes to me and says, with a young dog, so I'm talking about a dog under 8-9 months of age here. So let's just say they say, oh, at home, in the garden, I can throw a retriever out and it brings it back really nicely. But here I get a little bit of showboating, or he's doing this, or he seems more distracted. Well, firstly, maybe where you're training with me is more distracting to the dog. Maybe the fact we're on a working farm and there's the sheep in the field 2 fields over and the goats breaking out of their field another 2 fields over. Or even just the fact that I'm there in the scenario, I'm somebody to show off to sometimes. So it's understanding those things. And it's also where a trainer can help you to see the difference between, well, he's just a little bit distracted, so just make a little bit of noise, get him back on track, get him to look at you. Or, okay, yes, that is being naughty. We don't want him to get into a habit of scent marking, because especially if you want to do working tests, your dog scent marks, 0 straight away. So where a trainer can say, okay, that is scent marking. That's not having a pee, that's scent marking. So a trainer can help you to understand what's going on with a young dog, and help you to understand how to and when to correct inappropriate things, and equally how to and when to encourage the dog and use a bit of enthusiasm so that the dog doesn't feel like they're being bullied or the fun's being taken out of the scenario. So I think a trainer can really help you from a different perspective to understand what's happening, because it is so difficult in the moment yourself to not get frustrated or feel disappointed if something that your dog did in the garden yesterday, today they're not doing it in the same way. But then bear in mind, when you come to a training field, there might have been 5 or 6 dogs there before that dog. So the dog will be picking up on the scent of all the other dogs. While often let your dog have a little toilet break, then let them have a little sniff around, and then we'll start training. So especially with a young dog, so we let them get that little bit of curiosity out of the way before we start with the training. Does that make sense, guys?
Yeah, absolutely. How is it best, though, for an owner to recognise and adapt their training techniques, do you think, Jem?
I suppose it all boils down to knowing your dog as well, doesn't it? Every dog's going to be slightly different. Some are going to be cheekier than others. And I think as handlers, we just need to be in that sort of fluid state of what we're doing today. The moment we go out with a set plan for a youngster of what we're going to train is the moment that frustration creeps in for both sides, because it might be a bad day. You might be having a bad day. Your dog might be tired. Your dog might be, super aroused by something that's going on in the environment. So I think going out with an open mind on what you're going to do and being able to adapt that and know how to sort of almost bring your dog back to a base level. So like Claire was saying, like, go and let it have a sniff, go and let it have a wee, decompress a bit, then come back and start again. So don't keep sort of trying to hammer the point home if it's going wrong. Make it easier, do something else, take the dog's mind off it, take your mind off it.
And that's where I always use my rule of thumb for when to correct the dog with owners. I will say, if something's gone wrong twice, on the third attempt, change something, make it shorter, make it easier. Do something to set the young dog up for success. Don't keep, because the more times you repeat something and it goes wrong, or the dog does a behavior incorrectly, but maybe it's self-rewarding for the dog. So although you don't like showboating, for the dog, that might be quite self-rewarding, running around with the dummy, showing it off to you. So the more times the dog repeats that behavior, the more likely that that's going to become a bad habit. that then you are going to have to correct. So instead of letting the dog continually repeat the same behaviour, change something. So that's why I always say to people, if it goes wrong twice, change something. Don't let that keep repeating. Change something. Make it shorter, make it easier. Put the dog in a retrieving run, put a long line on, stand with your back to effect. You know, there are so many things. So it's giving owners options that they can then play with is important. Like, because as Jem just said, not one way works for all dogs. And this goes for all training, whether it's Gundog training, obedience training, puppy training, behavioural training, all of those things. Not one thing works for every dog. So having a multitude of options for an owner to try and to play with is the key. But they do need to try that thing consistently for a little while to actually get change. So for me, it's always give them some options to play with, let them know what to do, but make sure that they understand that this is a young dog. It's going through hormonal changes. It's going through adolescence. There's a lot of stuff going on. So don't take the fun out of it.
With regards to consistency, which you sort of just touched upon there, we talk all the time about the importance of consistency in Gundog training, full stop. But right now, it is really, really, really important that we stay steady, isn't it?
Yeah, it doesn't help the dog or the owner if you lose your mind and just keep on changing tact, or, you know, you do need to give the dog guidance, and that's what it is. It's giving the dog guidance on, this is what I want from you, and make sure you reward that. People are really, really quick to stop rewarding adolescent dogs, and I never understand that. Like, okay, I'm probably an over rewarder. I'm going to put my hands up and say that. I love to reward my dogs. Whether that's verbal praise or play or giving them a food reward, especially in training, because if you're going to go and do a working test with your dog, obviously you can't reward the dog. So I want to have built up enough value in what I'm asking the dog to do. But for some reason, people are really, really keen to get rid of rewards as quickly as possible. We even have people in puppy classes ask that question. They say, when can I get rid of the rewards? Well, I will then turn around to a puppy owner and say, when do you want your boss to stop paying you? And when I say that, that usually gets them to go, oh, right. So I say, like, don't think reward doesn't mean food. Reward is anything that that young dog deems rewarding. So it could be that you use their face. So a spaniel, you might release them from hill work into having a sniff of the long grass because they find that rewarding. It doesn't have to be about food, but we have to be rewarding the dogs for the behaviours that we want more of.
I think I'd be quite rich by now if I had a pound or two for every time someone said, oh, but they're only doing it for the treats. But trying to explain to people that the treats or the reward or whatever is the motivator for that dog, and we're pairing whatever they're doing with that so that they find that thing rewarding, can be really difficult for some people. And they, like you say, they just want to get rid of everything as soon as possible and almost have this little robot that just responds to whatever they've asked it to do. And like you, Claire, I think I probably reward my dogs far too much, and still they will get a reward every time they bring a retrieve back, whether that's a big fuss or a play or a treat, because I want to keep that drive in there. I want to keep them gunning to go out for it. And they're like, what are they now? 2 and 5. So they're not young.
But I look how much our dogs love what they do. I think you've only got to look at videos of you working your dogs, Jo working her dogs, me working my dogs, Sam working, you know, us guys working our dogs and using rewards in a way that the dogs appreciate, not just giving them food for the sake of giving them food. But our dogs look happy when they're working. They look happy when they're working. And I think the problem is, I don't think it's a problem. I think that's the wrong word, maybe. You might want to correct me in a minute, ladies. But I think when I look at what I see a lot of happening, especially in the Gundog training sector, actually in any dog sport sector, actually, I think Yeah, this is what I think. I think everybody wants to get onto the cool, serious stuff really, really quickly, especially if they want to compete, whatever that dog sport is, but we're specifically talking about gun dog training. They want to get onto the stuff that looks very cool, which is technically more challenging and more serious. And when you see videos on social media of a lot of trainers doing that kind of stuff, you don't very often, unless it's one of us or some of our friends that are trainers, don't very often see the rewards happening, do you? Actually, you just see a really polished looking exercise. And I think people see that and go, oh, it needs to look like that. What do you think, Jem?
No, I think you're definitely right. I think the only sport that you probably see the rewards happening in is agility, because they always have that throw of the toy at the end, don't they? And that's what they're around for. But when you look at this high level obedience or whatever, where these dogs are like stuck to these people's sides and doing backwards and forwards and whatever, you never see the fuss, because that's all off camera at the end. And I think that's probably quite hard for some people, that they don't understand it fully.
If we think about humans and then we think about dogs, we can get an idea much quicker. When a kid is little, you've only got to say, oh, do you want to go to the park? And they're like, yeah. They're like hyper. They're so excited by it because it was something fascinating. But then you get to a teenager and you go, oh, do you want to go to a park? And they're like, hell no. But then, you know, you might ask them to do something. Like I could say to my kids when they were little, when they were 5, oh, do you want to play with a Hoover? And they go, yeah. And they'll have a little go with you because they're all excited. And you say to them, do you want to play with the Hoover as a teenager? And they say, how much? Because it's the same thing, but their hormones mean they don't value it. It's not so much they've changed. Their hormones have said, what's in it for me that's going to be more interesting than sitting watching TV or reading a book or scrolling through social media. And even if you look at as adults, when we come in from work and we have a glass of wine or something, we find a way to self-reward ourselves for actually even getting through the day.
Yeah, absolutely that. And I think you just touched on something super important there, and you will hear people, and it is absolutely right, for gun dogs, whether that's be spaniels hunting or retrievers retrieving or whatever, when they're an adult, a grown adult, and even when they're tiny little puppies, I think the actual act of doing the retrieve or doing the hunting to find the thing is self-rewarding. But during that period of adolescence, when the hormones are kicking in and the little inner voice is chatting away, I think that's the challenging time, because there's a lot of other things that dog wants to go and investigate, wants to go and try doing, that challenge that innate behavior, that challenge that innate desire to do the thing. There's the hormonal stuff going on that interferes with that. But once you get through that, 100% for most dogs, doing the job is rewarding. That doesn't mean we have to stop rewarding them, but doing the job is rewarding. But during adolescence, there's a hell of a lot of other stuff going on for the dog that interferes with that feeling.
I think that maybe it's like, well, you touched upon this, a little while ago in this podcast, though. They've got all this growing going on. Their body is growing so quickly, maturing so quickly, everything inside them that maybe you're not completely seeing it all, but it's all developing at such a high speed. It's almost a bit of a, I can't be asked to do what you want me to do right now because I'm just doing this thing for me. Is it a case of that we've just got to sort of step back and go, actually, right now, I'm going to ask you to do stuff. I'm not going to ask for it so many times. And I'm not going to be so perfect on it. I'm just going to work with you through what is an incredibly hard time for you.
One of my top tips on that question, Joe, is leave the dog wanting more. Don't overtrain the dog. And so that training time, that time frame that you can train the individual dog for will vary very much from dog to dog through adolescence. But my biggest tip for that, to get through what you've just said, is to leave the dog wanting more. So do enough to get something nice, but don't keep pushing and pushing until the dog's bored and then that inner voice interferes again, leave the dog wanting more.
Exactly that. And I think that's something we say to our clients a lot, particularly with the retrieving, because you see it go wrong so quickly when they've just made the dogs dead bored of doing it. And we've all been there, I think, when we've done an amazing retrieve and we think, oh, we'll just do one more. And then that retrieve goes wrong. So definitely leave them wanting more. Short, sharp, little training sessions that are super fun and engaging for the dogs when they're going through adolescence, because you just don't want to make it boring, because we know that at that age they're going to find a lot more exciting than us and training with us. So try and make it as engaging as possible, keep it short, keep it sweet, and like Claire says, keep them wanting more.
So on the one side, we are saying keep chilled, allow for what's going on, but then we are very aware on the other side, we do not let them take the absolute proverbial either, because again, it's that balance, isn't it? I'm going to be a little bit calmer with you, kiddo, but on the other side, don't take the mick out of me.
That is 100% it, and it's finding that balance, and it's understanding. Don't make excuses for the dog, but do understand the dog and set the dog up for success. Build desire, build drive, leave them wanting more, but don't let unwanted things become a bad habit that later on you're going to have to try and rectify, because that's much, much harder than taking it easy and working with the dog through that adolescent phase.
Yeah, and I think we spoke about it, Jo, in that podcast we did about boundaries at home. I think if you can keep a lid on all of the sort of behaviours you expect of your adolescent dog at home, use your training sessions for doing those little things that you need them to work on and keeping it fun, I think you can keep those boundaries a lot more under control, and make sure that those unwanted naughtiness isn't sort of slipping in and being sort of ignored through adolescence.
We've got a fantastic masterclass on neutering. So for people who want to like really go into that, that's there for you. But one of the things I always see on social media is, oh, my dog is hitting adolescent, shall I go spay, shall I go neuter? Like this, like, you know, stopping all of the hormones is going to solve the problem. That really isn't the case, is it?
No, there are only a couple of behaviours which neutering or spaying will improve, and still they shouldn't be done until a dog is fully grown and fully matured physically and mentally, in my opinion, because the hormones are there for a reason. There are a couple of behaviours which are they're quite rare behaviours to see. In terms of the behaviour work I see, most of the behavioural problems I see are fear-based or something like that. They're very rarely a really truly dominant aggressive dog, and we know that neutering a male dog who is that way inclined in the right circumstances, like I'm not going to sit here and say neuter a dog that has this behavior, because for that dog that might not be the right thing. But there are a couple of behaviors where in certain circumstances and incidences, I can't say that word, instances, there you go. There you go. I couldn't get through a podcast without one word going very wrong, could I? But anyway, instances where we may recommend neutering for that dog alongside very specific behavior modification and training program. However, for an adolescent dog, there's a lot of risk in neutering or spaying the dog too young. You are affecting hormones that are there to aid growth and stopping of growth and hormonal development and the dog building. You know, I mentioned earlier about building a strong dog. If you've got a dog that is very, very fearful, anxious, nervous tendencies, fearful type behaviors, and you neuter or spay that dog, you are very, very, very likely. In fact, I haven't seen a dog yet where this isn't the case. When I've worked with dogs that are fearful and have been neutered or spayed, the behavior becomes worse because you're taking away the hormones that give the dog confidence. So actually you can make a lot of behaviors that are fear-based or anxiety-based worse by neutering and spaying. But for a young dog, you very likely are going to also have issues because you've taken away hormones that are part of the development and growth of that dog. Jem, is there anything you want to add on that?
I think, unfortunately, for whatever reason, although I've heard more and more that vets aren't doing it, a lot of vets are very keen to get the dog spayed or castrated as soon as they're sort of 6-7 months old. And we quite often have clients come and say, oh, what do you think about it? I think for me, I would leave a dog almost as long as possible. So boys, I would probably leave till 3, girls probably 3 as well, actually, as a minimum, because I think the hormones in development, like you said, are really important, not only for their growth plates and everything to form properly and nice solid joints and bones and whatever, but I think if we spay the dogs too early before they're mentally mature, they almost get stuck in a permanent puppy stage, and they're almost a bit silly. We often get clients ask about will spaying or castrating their dog calm them down? Now, we all know that that's not going to happen. They're usually, those dogs just have a lack of self-control and they haven't been taught the boundaries that they need to be taught. But unfortunately, where they go and read things online and things, they see castration and neutering as the sort of solution to all these problems, and that when that happens, their dog's suddenly going to be this reformed character. But what we have found is quite good. When Claire was talking about, obviously, it can have a bad effect on behaviour if we do castrate anxious dogs and whatever. With the chemical castration, it's not a permanent thing. So if that does go a little bit AWOL and it doesn't work quite as we expect, it's not a permanent thing. The dogs can regain those hormones that they were maybe relying on for that behaviour, and they can come back. So if you are a bit unsure on whether to castrate your dogs, then go to your vet and talk about that chemical castration, because it can be a nice sort of almost try before you buy option if you're a bit worried about that.
I think the other thing to just maybe add on while we're on that subject that we didn't talk about yet is dogs can go through a second fear phase anytime between 6 months of age and around 14 months of age. You know, depending on who you speak to and what you read, that time frame can differ a little bit, but they can go through a second fear phase. And if you were to spay or neuter the dog during that time when they're going through that second fear phase, you know, that could again exacerbate that problem, because you're removing the hormones that are giving the dog strength of character and confidence. So that is also a risk. So I always say to people, if they're considering neutering or spaying their dog, I will firstly say, do you have any behavioural problems that are going on that should be considered first? Is there a medical reason for getting that dog neutered or spayed? Because sometimes there is a medical reason. And obviously in older dogs with females, I like to say females instead of the B word at the moment, because I know that people don't like that word sometimes. But anyway, with some females, I forgot. Oh, the risk of pyometra goes up as the dog gets older. But obviously in a young dog, the risk of that is incredibly low. So I think it's always, for me, if somebody wants to get my advice on spaying and neutering, I will ask if there's a medical reason why, are there behaviour problems that, you know, they should be considering that are for and against, and what their real reasons are, and checking that the dog is unless there's a medical reason, that the dog is fully grown mentally and physically before making that decision.
It is quite baffling, the difference in attitudes between, if you look at gynecologists for humans, they are very reluctant to sterilize someone because of changes in hormones, changing in life circumstances, changes in everything really. And then you look at the veterinary practice, and it seems so fast before you've even got a dog that's maybe old enough to go through that thing. And I think for people, whilst you can maybe think, and I've had dogs spayed myself, looking back, I think, was I doing it to suit me or to suit them? And I'm not so sure. As my knowledge has grown, I think where I am now, I would be very reluctant, unless it was for a medical reason, to spay or neuter anything, because it doesn't make the changes we think it's going to make all the time, and we cannot know the absolute outcome.
And I think that's the thing, it's always going to be a gamble. There's never a guarantee that it's going to improve this or that. You know, it is a gamble. So I think that's why we have to consider all factors before making those decisions based on the individual dog, for sure.
So I think this has been another fantastically interesting podcast. Thank you to the listeners for tuning in. Thank you to the experts for being amazing as always. We have mentioned a couple of masterclasses and other podcasts that you might want to go listen to. So please make sure to subscribe. Podcasts are now on week 1 and week 3 of every month on Fridays. So hopefully you can enjoy them, love them as much as everybody else does. For those of you who are members, you also have additional podcasts on your private podcast. Thank you all for listening, and we hope to speak to you all next week. Thank you for listening to LWDG POD DOG with Joanne Parrott, founder of the Ladies Working Dog Group. If you're interested in joining our supportive community and taking advantage of our group experts training and resources, please visit our website at www.thelwdg.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and leave us a review, and we look forward to helping you and your four-legged friend thrive. Until next time, keep training, keep learning, and keep working with your beloved gun dog.